Phase 2 in the evolution of consciousness, building a stable and mature ego. The development of human consciousness, according to the theory of evolution of consciousness, hereafter referred to as TC, unfolds in 4 phases. The first 2 phases represent the development of subjective consciousness, and the latter 2 represent the development of objective consciousness. We now continue with the explanation of the second phase in the evolution of human consciousness. The second phase is a period in which the ego, the subjective consciousness, is already formed, but still not stable or developed enough to manage all parts of the psyche in a calm and consistent way. The ego has gained some control over the emotional, relational, mental, active, and sensory parts of the psyche. Together, they form the personality, whose center is precisely the ego. In this phase, the ego is aware of itself, sets goals, carries an internal image of the kind of person it wants to become, and attempts to make decisions in accordance with those values. However, the stability it has established is not yet strong enough to always maintain control in critical situations. Sometimes, under the influence of an impulse, emotion, or desire coming from another part of the psyche, the ego yields, even when it consciously knows the decision is not in alignment with the integrity of the whole personality. The main difference from phase 1 is that in phase 2, the person already knows what is happening inside. The ego, as the center, can distinguish itself from a specific psychological impulse. It knows it has a choice, but it does not always have the inner strength to follow through. When it gives in, it is usually followed by regret, reflection, and analysis, showing that the ego is now a functioning center capable of evaluating its own actions. This ongoing process of internal conflict, surrender, realization, and correction is what defines the second phase. At this stage, the foundational structure of the personality is being built. It is being tested, strengthened, and shaped through real-life experience. The goal is not to suppress the impulses, but to learn how to manage them without compromising the dignity of the personality. The ego in this phase is not repressive. It seeks to make decisions that are accepted by the other psychological parts, without disturbing the internal order. In essence, the second phase is the process in which the person learns how to act consciously, even in moments of inner conflict. It is a phase of maturing, in which the ego increasingly establishes itself as a stable coordinator of inner life. The role of the idol in the second phase. In the second phase, the ego no longer makes decisions solely based on current needs, impulses, or socially learned rules. Instead, its choices increasingly rely on a value-based image it holds of itself, an image that originates from a real physical person the ego sees as an idol. The idol is an example of a way of being that the ego aspires to. It is not an abstract ideal or fantasy, but a real human, known or unknown, who, in the eyes of the ego, embodies a set of qualities worthy of imitation. This imitation is not based on appearance or success alone, but on the way that person lives, acts, responds in certain situations, and carries themselves. The ego does not analytically dissect what makes that person valuable. It does not break them down into parts. This one is smart, hardworking, looks like this, reacts like that. It embraces the whole as a direction. It sees a way of being, not just the outcome. Simply by having someone as an idol, the ego already knows how to behave, what to do, what choices to make, and how much effort to invest. In every internal dilemma, when, for example, the relational or sensory part demands something that contradicts that image, the ego reevaluates the decision through the lens of the idol. The question is no longer, "What do I want?" or "What's easiest for me?" but rather, "What would the person I want to become do?" In this way, the idol becomes an inner reference point, not as a moral authority that punishes, but as a guiding orientation for decisions. This doesn't mean the ego copies everything. It simply strives to live in harmony with the values that the idol represents. However, there is a risk. If the ego chooses an idol too far beyond the realistic capacity of the person, it can lead to inner frustration, self-criticism, and a sense of inadequacy. That's why the first step before choosing an idol is for the ego to get to know itself, to understand what is natural to it, where its limits are, what is within reach, and where growth is possible. Only then can it choose an idol who is a step ahead, but not unreachable. Still, the choice of an idol usually happens unconsciously. Sometimes a person simply leaves a strong impression, and we begin to imitate their behavior without realizing it. How does the ego decide whether to yield or resist a part of the psyche? In the second phase, the psychological parts, emotional, relational, mental, sensory, or active, regularly send out desires, needs, and urges. These are not negative by nature. They are a natural part of inner life. But not every impulse aligns with the kind of person the ego is trying to build. In such situations, it is the ego that decides. Will it give in to the request? Or will it resist and say no? This decision is not made randomly, nor is it always based on external rules. The ego evaluates the desire in relation to the idol it has chosen, that is, based on the value image of the kind of person it wants to become. For example, if the relational part demands something that would compromise the ego's sense of dignity or personal integrity, the ego assesses, is this something my idol would do? Is this aligned with the kind of person I strive to be? Will the consequences weaken or strengthen the structure of the personality? If the answer is negative, the ego resists, even if the emotional pull is strong. But that resistance doesn't come in the form of force or suppression. It's a decision that arises from a higher level of awareness, one that considers the broader context and cares for the whole. Sometimes, the ego may decide to partially give in, but with a condition or a boundary. This means the goal is not to suppress the parts of the psyche, but to manage them in a way that does not damage the internal structure of the personality. This is where the maturity of the ego becomes visible, not in whether it says yes or no, but in whether the decision aligns with its value system and preserves the dignity of the whole. Self-assessment as the first step toward the development of consciousness. The first and most important step in the second phase is for the person to assess themselves realistically. This means not only recognizing who they want to become, but honestly seeing where they currently stand in terms of their inner structure. This assessment is not done superficially or based on wishful thinking, but through sincere observation of each part of the psyche. Regarding the ego, the questions are, how stable am I? Do I have self-confidence? Can I make decisions without collapsing under emotional or social pressure? Regarding the emotional part, how emotional am I? How sensitive am I to criticism? How much do I need protection from others, and how easily do I get hurt? Regarding the relational part, is it important for me to have someone by my side? To what extent am I willing to diminish myself or become dependent just to avoid being alone? Regarding the active part, how much do I need movement, action, goals? Do I like to win, to compete? How do I feel when I'm inactive? Regarding the mental part, how important is it for me to gather information? Do I enjoy communicating? Does conversation fulfill me, even if it's empty? Do I enjoy gossip? Regarding the sensory part, what do I need to feel comfortable in my body? How attached am I to food, physical touch, comfort, and pleasure? How much do I care about material possessions and money? If you recognized yourself in any of these questions, or saw someone close to you in this description, then you probably understand how this is not an easy phase, but a deeply important one in your inner development. This phase is not about perfection. It is about the struggle for maturity. And every struggle, every moment in which you give in but later understand why, is already a part of the consciousness that is growing within you. Subscribe if you'd like to explore the next phases with me. where the ego will come face to face with something higher than itself and will have to choose to fight or to step back. In the comments, share. When was the last time you knew what was right, but did something else? And what did you learn from that? Every honest sentence you write could open a door for someone else, and maybe your question will become the topic of the next video. Until then, observe, not to judge yourself, but to understand.